successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is isolated and of the packet for
Welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. My name is Nelly, and this is episode 9. If this is your first time, the Dancing Toaster is a podcast that wrestles with the intersection of faith and the paranormal. Don't worry, my toasters, we are going to dive into a story this week. I just want to remind you, before we get started, that today's episode will be slightly different. I have a busy week, and I know you do too, with Thanksgiving coming up. We'll consider one major story, and probably one major text today, and next week we'll resume business as usual and do a proper deep dive. Without further ado, today's story is about the exorcism of Ronald Hunkler, but you may know it as the case of Roland Doe, the incident that inspired the infamous movie entitled The Exorcist. Our story begins in Cottage City, Maryland, more than half a century ago. In January of 1949, a young man named Ronald Hunkler was mourning the loss of his beloved Aunt Harriet in a small suburban home. Despite the name, Harriet wasn't your typical church potluck attendee. She was into spiritualism, a woman fascinated with spirits and the world beyond. She was slowly introducing Ronnie to this world of hers, one of seances and Ouija boards and attempting to communicate with those no longer with us. She would often conduct sessions with her young nephew before her sudden and untimely demise. The cause of her death was unknown, but it left Ronnie heartbroken and deeply missing his friend and former mentor. In his sadness and desperation, he decided to unearth the Ouija board Harriet had gifted to him. Once finding it against his better judgment, he would reach out to his dear aunt using the Ouija board alone. He placed the board upon the table and grabbed the planchette and began to cry out into the void, mimicking what Harriet had shown him before.
Hello?
Ronald was disappointed that nothing happened that night, or so he thought. It began with small things. The family first heard dripping sounds throughout the house. Thinking, of course, they must have a leak, they searched high and low for the source, but could find no explanation. They called a plumber, but he too had no success discovering the source of the noises. Then came the scratching and thumping in the walls. This time they suspected mice in the house, so naturally they called exterminators. No signs of infestation were found, at least of any natural kind. They left traps and said they would follow up, but the traps were always untouched. The activity escalated quickly. Soon, furniture began to move on its own. Objects would suddenly fly across rooms. Footsteps could be heard throughout empty halls. At first, they thought that perhaps Harriet was trying to communicate with them, but doubt slowly crept in on this theory when one night a religious piece of art shook violently on the wall as if someone or something was moving it from behind. Yet all of this was still mild compared to what was to come. Things would take a frightening turn, and Ronnie himself would become the epicenter of the supernatural darkness. In the dead of night, while Ronnie lay, out of nowhere his bed began to shake violently. He screamed for his mother. She witnessed the nightmare unfold, but was just as helpless to explain what was behind it. This would happen on multiple nights, but eventually the nocturnal activities expanded. During the school day, bizarre happenings would follow Ronnie to class. He was normally a quiet boy, but some began to see him as strange and troublesome. Inexplicable things would happen around him. His desk would begin to shake and rattle, disrupting his class. Other times it would slide into other students who were going down the aisle. Books and fruit flew across the room and landed near him. Teachers would rebuke and scold him.
Time to go.
They and his classmates thought he was trying to be a class clown, but Ronald would swear up and down he had nothing to do with these strange things. Attempting a rational approach, his parents took him to see some doctors as well as a psychiatrist, but none of them found anything wrong with Ronald from a medical perspective. They thought maybe he was just a little stressed and anxious after experiencing his first major loss, but otherwise, he was an incredibly healthy young man. The terrifying forces that shook him every night physically and mentally would escalate further. Strange cuts and marks began to show up on the boy. The family, more troubled than ever, begins to conclude it can't be medical, it must be spiritual. They decided to consult the Ouija board together this time. They would attempt to contact Harriet for answers. If she herself wasn't the cause, they thought that perhaps she could help them figure out what was happening to young Ronnie. Together, they placed the board on the table. Each of them placed a hand on the planchette, and they called out,
"Is there a spirit in the house?"
The planchette slowly moved. The board replied, yes. Then they made a request.
If you're Harriet, prove it to us."
Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped and they felt a presence in the room. The answer didn't come from the board this time. The answer showed up on Ronnie's rib cage. A word showed up on the boy's skin. The awful marks on his body spelled out the word, Lewis. More horrified than ever and just as confused, they decided to reach out to a pastor for answers and assistance. At times, the family attended a Lutheran church, so they reached out to their local Lutheran pastor, Luther Miles Scholes. Pastor Miles arrived to pray and comfort the family. Immediately, seeing their distress and the marks on the poor boy, he already began to feel out of his depth. He also witnessed the shaking of Ronnie's bed and the bizarre movement of furniture and dishes of their own accord. Desperately desiring to help the family, he took the boy into his own home for several days. But when the activities continued, he informed the family that they should find a Catholic priest. He felt they may be able to offer answers that he could not. Taking his counsel, the family sought assistance from their local Catholic parish, St. James, where the assistant pastor, Reverend Edward Hughes, prayed with them. He provided holy water and blessed candles, instructing the family to use them in their home if the disturbances recurred. Despite following the instructions, the strange phenomena continued. One evening, the holy water reportedly flew across the room, shattering on impact. The candles that they were given either extinguished themselves mysteriously or dangerously flared up. According to one account, Reverend Hughes eventually visited the family's home himself. It is said that the experience left him so deeply unsettled that he contacted the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. for guidance. Those same accounts say an initial exorcism was attempted on Ronnie at Georgetown University Hospital, a Jesuit institution in D.C. Allegedly during the ritual, Ronnie was able to break free from his restraints. With his free hand, it said he removed a bed spring from beneath the mattress and using it as a weapon, he lacerated the priest's arm. This incident caused the ritual to be abruptly stopped by the priest. With nothing bringing any relief to Ronnie, they made the decision to leave Maryland and go to where they had additional family. Looking for support and a change of scenery, and secretly hoping that leaving their home would leave the darkness behind, the family goes to St. Louis. Many say a major contributing factor to this decision was the word Lewis showing up on the boy's stomach. Sadly, they would soon realize the issue was not in Maryland, but in Ronald. Ronnie and his mother arrived in St. Louis. They got there March of 1949 and stayed with relatives in the suburb of Belnor. Shortly after arriving, they received a visit from a Father Raymond Bishop. At the time, he was a professor at SLU, where one of Ronnie's cousins was a university student. It was this cousin that had informed Father Bishop of what the family was enduring. Acting on the advice of fellow faculty, he agreed to meet with the boy and bless the home. The night they met, Ronnie's bed began shaking, but the tremors ceased when Father Bishop sprinkled holy water upon the boy in the sign of the cross. After this discomforting event, Bishop knew he would need seasoned assistance. Enter Father William Bowdern. Father William Bowdern was the pastor of St. Francis Xavier College Church. Father Bowdern was a 52-year-old war veteran. He not only served in the war, but had years of experience serving and helping others in the community. After hearing from Bishop, Bowdern agreed to visit Ronnie. During Bowdern's visit, he witnessed long scratches form on the boy's skin in the shape of a cross. He heard screams that were the stuff of nightmares, and the vial of holy water would fly across the room without explanation. The phenomena grew increasingly severe. This prompted both priests to seek permission from the St. Louis Archbishop to formally perform the rite of exorcism. After reviewing the situation, the Archbishop granted his approval, but he instructed them to keep quiet and to keep meticulous records of the exorcism. Bishop would be responsible for documenting every occurrence in detail, and Bowdern began the preparation for the ritual by consulting the Rituale Romanum, a 400-year-old Latin text of Catholic rituals. Buried within these pages is a section called De exorcizantis obsessis demonio. It means on exorcising those possessed by the devil. It describes how a priest is to perform the rite of exorcism on someone. The priest must pronounce the rite with a commanding voice. He ought to have a crucifix in hand. If the person experiences disturbances on any part of their body, the priest is to trace the sign of the cross over that part of the body and sprinkle it with holy water. What followed can only be described as a 28-day spiritual siege. Over the next month, Bishop and Bowdern would be assisted by the family and several other priests, such as Father Walter Holleran, as they all sought to free Ronnie from this clear case of demonic possession. Father Halloran stated in a later interview, "That's how I knew we were dealing with the real deal. When that vial flew by itself across the room and smashed into the wall opposite the dresser it was placed on. You read about these kind of things, but they never really happen." During the ceremony, as objects would inexplicably move, Ronnie would scream. He uttered all manner of vulgarity toward the clergyman. At times he could be heard speaking in Latin, a language he had never learned, and doing so in a foreign, devilish voice. He also exhibited superhuman strength. While performing the ritual, it would often take 3 grown men at a time to subdue the boy. Many nights he would spit in the faces of the priests while screaming obscenities at them. One night, Father Holleran received more than foul language and spit in his face. Late one evening, deep into the ritual, Ronnie was able to get a hand free and he brutally punched the priest in his face, breaking his nose in the process. When he wasn't throwing fists, he was throwing insults and saying awful things to and about the priests. Ronnie was still getting horrible cuts and marks on his body during the ordeal. At times, the marks would form what looked to be a devil on the boy's leg. At other times, it said the words hell and evil on his chest. Despite all this, the priests refused to back down. The ritual was done nightly, and once while still in the Belle-Noire house, they believed their hell was coming to an end. After a grueling 4 hours with Ronnie screaming and contorting, suddenly he appeared as though he was going to throw up. He urgently requested that the window near his bed be opened. His mother cautiously complied. Ronald ran to the window and vomited a thick, black substance. After a few minutes, his demeanor shifted drastically. He appeared to return to his normal self. Everyone was overjoyed. They felt as if this incredible burden had finally been lifted. The family and the priests knelt together in prayer, offering heartfelt thanks to God. But it seems the priests forgot about a warning contained within the Rituale Romanum. Sometimes the devil will allow the possessed person to be at peace in order to make it appear as though he is departed. The exorcist must be on his guard, lest he fall into this trap. Later that evening, around 3 a.m., Ronnie cries out for his mother once again.
Mom, help! Mom, help! He's back! He's coming back! He's coming back!
I'm back.
Within minutes, Father Bowdern gets a call that the fight still wasn't over. When the priests returned, the violence was more than it had ever been. All the priests knew more had to be done. They moved the boy from the Belle-Noire home into the rectory of College Church. Unfortunately, a change of scenery, even upon sacred ground, still did not change the boy's condition. Objects continued to be thrown across the room by unseen hands. Ronnie's body continued to contract and contort violently and unnaturally. Dreadful marks continued to appear, and with them awful words and messages upon the boy's skin, and vile things still left his lips. In mid-April of 1949, they would relocate Ronnie once again, this time to the Alexian Brothers Hospital. He was placed within a secure wing that had locks on the doors and steel mesh over the windows. Within the walls of that hospital, the priests would have their last stand with the demon or demons within Ronnie. Ronnie had to be placed far away from all the other patients as to not frighten them. All the usual behaviors persisted during the rituals, but the priests pressed on, even as Ronald levitated during one particularly intense session in the ward. Halloran, who previously had his nose broken by Ronnie, would be attacked in other ways by him. In all of Ronnie's screaming and cursing, he also revealed that he knew things he couldn't have known normally. For instance, Ronald would have had no way of knowing that Father Halloran had recently lost his mother. But the night he came to help, after a series of terrifying multi-octave barks, a sinister smile crawled across the boy's face, and he said to Halloran,
"Your mother says hello. She's rotting in hell."
On Easter Monday, April 18th, 1949, Robbie awoke in a violent fit. Father Bowden resumed the rite of exorcism, once again placing holy items in the boy's hands and around his neck. According to Father Bishop's diary, Bowden demanded the demon's name and commanded it to leave Ronnie in peace. The fit continued unabated. As recorded in Bishop's notes, the demon taunted Bowden, saying,
"He has to say one more word, one little word, I mean one big word. He'll never say it. He'll never say it."
Bowden and the assisting priest remained steadfast, persisting in their prayers and commands. Then, shortly before midnight, a distinctly different male voice emerged from Ronnie. As documented in Father Bishop's diary,
"Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and all the evil spirits to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately. Now, now, now!"
Ronnie collapsed. A few moments later, he awoke, calm, composed. He looked up and told the priest,
He's gone. He's gone.
He described to the priests a vivid dream in which Saint Michael the Archangel had battled the devil and his demons, ultimately freeing him. Some accounts of the evening say that a loud noise resembling a gunshot reverberated from the hospital ward where Ronnie was staying, further adding to the mysterious events that unfolded. And just like that, peace had returned. Ronnie fell into a deep sleep and awoke again as a normal boy that day. The nightmare was finally over, but many of the scars, physical and emotional, remained upon those involved. The St. Louis Archdiocese received the full, formal report of the exorcism, officially concluding the case of Ronald Hunkler. None of the organizations involved ever made any public statements about the events that transpired those horrendous 28 days. They all felt it best to prioritize the young boy's privacy and considered the matter resolved. However, in August of '49, Father Scholes, the Lutheran from Maryland, spoke about the exorcism publicly, prompting coverage from several news outlets, not least of all which was the Washington Post. A brief article also appeared in the Catholic Review. It was this article that later inspired a novelist by the name of William Peter Blatty to write his famous work entitled The Exorcist. Blatty altered major details of the exorcism for his novel, and even more changes were made when the famous 1973 film adaptation was made, also entitled The Exorcist. Ronnie is replaced by Reagan, but both interpretations were true to one key detail. A Ouija board was used that opened a door that almost wasn't shut. Ronald has gone by many names over the years. The parties involved did want him to remain anonymous, and for a long time he did. Father Bishop's journal simply referred to him as R. Early on, the event was called the Case of Roland Doe. Other accounts would use the pseudonym Robbie Mannheim, but in December 2021, the Skeptical Inquirer revealed his true identity, that of Ronald Edwin Hunkler. Ronald not only survived the exorcism, but he also returned to school. He grew up, he built a successful career for himself at NASA, and lived a relatively quiet life. He passed away in May of 2020, shortly before his 86th birthday. Reports say he passed from a stroke while at his home in Maryland. He never spoke of the events ever again. The exorcism of Ronald Hunkler stands as one of the most chilling accounts of demonic possession ever documented in the modern day. Many over the years have attempted to poke holes in the accounts and discredit the events and the people that were involved. They accuse the priests of either lying or embellishing. The exorcist himself, Father William Bowden, did not seek out wealth or any fame or recognition at any point in his life. Father Bishop kept detailed journals of the event as instructed that have become the chief source of information about what occurred. He did not become wealthy from the story of the 1949 exorcism. His journals were not published as a commercial work, nor did he seek public attention or any financial gain from the events. Father Bishop approached the case as an ecclesiastical duty and documented it for religious purposes. The popularization of the story came much later, notably through William Peter Blatty's novel, The Exorcist, in the later film adaptation. Blatty drew inspiration from the accounts of the exorcism, but did not base his work directly on Father Bishop's journals. Even if he had, Bishop would not have seen any financial gain from this. The last living priest involved was Father Halloran, who passed away in 2005. Though he wasn't involved throughout the entire ordeal, what he did see, he did not forget, and his story was consistent for over 50 years. Those that don't attack the priests will often attack Ronald. They accuse Ronnie of merely acting out and lying for attention. I have known some deceptive teenagers in my years, but to do this much, to take it this far, it's a tough pill for me to swallow. Is it possible that Ronnie took almost 50 different adults on this multi-state, multi-location charade? Did it truly get too big? Did he just manufacture the story and maintain the lie for 4 months? I suppose it's possible, but not probable. This weak explanation leaves too many questions unanswered. Of those accusing Ronnie of simply being a liar, I have found that they already disbelieve in the phenomenon in the first place. During his earthly ministry, many demanded that Jesus prove himself to them by performing the miraculous. Yet even after performing the miraculous, they would continue to doubt and demand more of him. It has been said that unbelief is always due to a lack of desire and not a lack of evidence. I have found this to be true over the years. This problem goes beyond my multiple decades, it goes back thousands of years. On one notable occasion, Jesus did something incredible, yet after performing the miracle, they didn't say it wasn't real. They simply grew determined to conceal the reality. It was one of the most startling moments for me in the ministry of Jesus. Much like the story of Ronnie, this one begins with a deep grief caused by a death. Jesus loses a best friend, and we join him as he arrives to the grave of his friend named Lazarus. Days prior, he had received word that Lazarus was sick, but he delayed providentially. Let's look at John chapter 11, starting in verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to the disciples,
"Let us go to Judea again."
The disciples said to him,
"Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again?"
Jesus answered,
"Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him."
After saying these things, he said to them,
"Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him."
The disciples said to him,
"Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover."
Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking a rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly,
"Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him."
So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples,
"Let us also go, that we may die with him."
Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus,
"Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you."
Jesus said to her,
"Your brother will rise again."
Martha said to him,
"I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day."
Jesus said to her,
"I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?"
She said to him,
"Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world."
When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private,
"The teacher is here and is calling for you."
And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him,
Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said,
Where have you laid him?
They said to him,
Lord, come and see.
Jesus wept. So the Jews said,
See how he loved him.
but some of them said,
Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?
Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone laid against it. Jesus said,
Take away the stone.
Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him,
Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days.
Jesus said to her,
Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?
So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said,
Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me.
When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice,
Lazarus, come out.
The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped up with a cloth. Jesus said to them,
Unbind him and let him go.
Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. I can't bring it up and not consider the event in its entirety. The first thing of note, contained within the passage, is the shortest verse in the entire Bible. Verse 35 simply says, Jesus wept. This perplexed me when I first read it after coming to faith in Christ. Why would he weep, I thought. His whole reason for being there was to display the power and glory of God and bring Lazarus back to life. Over time, I discovered there were a few reasons why he wept. One, he wept as a reminder of his full humanity. When we lose those we love, we weep, as did he. But as one who also had full divinity, he wept because it was never meant to be this way. The whole reason he had come to earth was because we sinned and brought death and darkness into the human condition. His life, his death, and his resurrection would mean the defeat of sin, the defeat of death, and the defeat of all the powers of darkness. But until then, we still exist on this sin-stained dirt rock, where evil and the unexplained still dwell just beneath the surface. This, of course, is not all I wanted you to see. I spoke of the skeptic, who's often not one who is searching, but one who is suppressing the truth in wickedness, just as Romans 1 says. If we go to chapter 12 of John, we don't see men debating over whether or not the supernatural truly occurred. No. Rather, they are discussing how they might conceal that it really did. John chapter 12, 9 to 11. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came, not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. My friends, some will not believe no matter what they see and no matter what you show them. Not because they cannot, but because they will not. You heard Jesus lament over Lazarus. Now listen to him lament over his people Israel in Matthew 23, verse 37 to 39. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I'm sure I've upset some skeptics and some Calvinists. Well, according to both, neither of you had a choice in the matter anyway, but I think you do. I think you do have a choice in the matter. You are not marching to the beat of your DNA, neither are you the robotic result of providence. Joshua 24:15, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Many accounts of Ronald's experience also report that he surrendered to Christ during his ordeal. Because we never heard from him again, we have no way to verify this, but the silence could also prove as evidence in this case. We've often considered Matthew 12, where Jesus speaks a warning. In verses 43 to 45, when the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came, and when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of the person is worse than the first. The Bible is clear. It reveals that demons and demonic possession are very real. Jesus cast out more evil spirits than anyone in the entire Bible. But if one is cast out or exorcised, the person is still in danger if the spirit returns to an empty vessel. You must be born again. You must receive the Holy Spirit, who is mightier than they, and He will protect you. I believe there is a strong possibility that Ronnie's conversion was genuine after the hell he endured. He flirted with forces he had no business messing with, things God warns about in His Word. The Ouija board opened the door and let something into the Hunkler house and into Ronnie himself. Last week we said that evil spirits don't play fair. They don't care about age or innocence. The exorcism performed was lengthy and complex, but the nightmare ended. Whether by God working through the priest or through an angel, by His grace Ronnie was freed. If you have knocked on that door, you must repent. Saved or unsaved, I bid thee still to repent. Our dives into Deuteronomy have demonstrated it's not a small matter to participate in these dark things. Some will still say, well, I used a Ouija board and nothing like this happened to me. My friend, you played spiritual Russian roulette. That's what you did. Thank God that nothing like this happened to you. Thank God for His mercy over you. We are far from done with this topic. Consider this a mere appetizer before Thanksgiving and before our proper deep dive on the topic of demonic possession next week. When we return, we will look at a few more accounts, ancient and modern, including another one involving a Ouija board, and more importantly, we'll go to the biblical text to sort all of this out. For those familiar with the Exorcist film, and perhaps bothered that I spoke on it or bring it up at all, this was not an endorsement of the film in any way. It was made, it exists, I'm acknowledging that. I have seen it, and I have no desire to ever see it again. I've said multiple times in previous episodes, I wish no one else would see it. It is terrifying. It is vile. But real evil is as well. That movie accurately depicts darkness in a way that made me truly uncomfortable. And after listening to a dozen interviews the author gave about it, that was exactly his intent. He has said that he never wanted to make a horror movie. That is to say, something that is just scary for people's entertainment. He discovered the event and wanted others to experience it and be brought face to face with realities that lie just beyond the veil. The author and the director of the film had 2 very different goals and visions, but Blatty succeeded in awakening people to the supernatural. He sought to inform as much as entertain. Again, the film contains things I hope you never see and that I never wish to see again. But when it was released in the 1970s, after viewing it, people flocked to churches. It moved people in ways that very few things can. I feel that I can acknowledge that without condoning the film outright. I know simply talking about it this much risks people wanting to go see it. You see a sign that says, "Don't walk on the grass," your flesh wants to go walk on the grass simply out of defiance. This is precisely why I will not leave you with a provoking prohibition. I'm not your dad, and if you're not up here in Washington State, I'm probably not your pastor. I am but a lowly podcaster that believes these things are real because the Bible says they are real. I don't believe them simply because William Blatty did. Why did people flock to churches after seeing the film? I believe it was because they were reminded that Satan and evil spirits very much exist. And if they exist, so too does God. So too does heaven, and also hell. God can use whatever He wants to get people's attention. Did He use the film for His purposes? I don't know, but I want you to consider the following. Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. The NIV words it this way. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Is it possible that many lives were spared from this film? We have no way of knowing for sure. I personally have never met anyone that said, I gave my life to Jesus after I watched The Exorcist. I can't say that, but that's not to say that it didn't happen. Whether you see the case of Roland Doe as proof of evil or merely a cautionary tale about the unseen world, one thing is certain: the battle between light and darkness is as real as it is mysterious. My toasters, I can't wait for you to join me again next week for a proper episode. Happy Thanksgiving from my family to yours. I am thankful for you and that you're going on this ride with me. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow, do all the things wherever you consume the Dancing Toaster, but whatever you do, don't consume toasters and don't consume stuffing that's too dry. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else will be taken in from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for runway.
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings.
Roger, 527. Maintaining northbound runway 8 kilo. Holding.
Do not travel to areas affected by the attack or in a known area elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident of attack and perhaps we will continue to inform the story of